This is Campaign Now, a conversation with Mark Block. Let's get started.
So Mark, thanks for joining me today. And I think it was 2006 is when I first met you. It was at a Waukesha taxpayer organization. Do you remember that?
Yeah.
And I was there, I think I was there with the college Republicans at Marquette.
Oh, sure.
Yeah, I remember that. And I don't remember why we were there. There was some issue going on. And anyway, you walked up and you introduced yourself and you said, oh, I know, I was there with the Scott Walker campaign. Okay, I ran a group called Students for Walker, and that was when he first ran against Mark Green in the primary. And I think I maybe did a brief presentation and you came up and you introduced yourself, and I'll never forget, you said, hi, I'm Mark Block. And I'm like, you know what I mean? And we shook hands, and then I think you invited me to visit you later that week, and that was 2 or 3 days after that event, Scott dropped out of the primary. Do you remember? So it was pretty wild time. So what I want to do is try to figure out like why, you spent how many years in politics in Wisconsin?
Well, I'm 70 years old. All right. And I really started politics in high school. So one could suggest that I've been doing this off and on for 60 years. In high school, I went to high school in Weywiga, Wisconsin, town of, at that point, 682 people. And I was freshman class president, sophomore class president, junior class president, senior class president, and student council president when I was a senior. While one could suggest that that's politics, which it was, that's kind of what compelled me then to get involved in the political arena. I remember in high school going and doing parades for Jim Long running for Congress against Harold Freilich. And
what district would that be in now?
The 8th district.
8th district.
8th district, and the Green Bay, Appleton, over to Stevens Point area. So, I've kind of been involved since then. But it's interesting, if you go back in time, historical, and I'm going to walk you through the decades a little bit. Vietnam was hot and heavy in the late 60s, early 70s, and that's when I was in high school.
Okay, got it, yeah.
And I remember being torn with going out and protesting.
Did you have to enroll? I mean, we all had enrolled, but was that draft age for you at the time?
It was draft age. My two older brothers were both drafted.
They were, okay.
But about the time, it's interesting, the congressman I ended up working for, being my mentor in my 20s, was Congressman Bill Steiger.
Okay. And
he authored the All-Volunteer Army, which hit and took effect right before I was going to see what my draft number was. But, it was a very, very traumatic time in the country. The Vietnam War just tore everybody apart. And I remember talking to one of my mentors at the time who said, and I said, there's a big protest going on in Oshkosh, and I think I want to go down there and raise hell. And he said, if you really want to change politics, you need to do it from the inside, not the outside.
Yeah, not the outside.
And that stuck with me. So, I'm now a senior in high school, graduating, going to go to the University of Wisconsin, Oshkosh. And I was picked to be an alternate delegate to the 1972 Republican Convention for Richard Nixon down in Miami. And I was 17 at the time. Right?
So you were involved with the county party during that, or that you must have been, right?
Yeah. So my first real taste of politics was 1972 with Richard Nixon. And I was the Nixon chairman on the University of Wisconsin campus, which, we met in a phone booth, which was sidebar. It's when I met Roger Stone.
Okay. Interesting.
I'll never forget Roger Stone coming to my dorm room. I still have the poster that he gave me, and he had a suitcase full of cash. This is before Watergate, before the Federal Election Commission laws and regulations. And he opened his briefcase and it was full of $100 bills, and he started grabbing them and handing them to me and saying, you got to do a beer party for Nixon. You got to do this for Nixon. So it was quite an incredible experience. And I remind Roger of that once in a while when I talk to him. So I got my start in high school, and now I'm in college. It was in 1972. Pat Lucey was the governor.
And just because was he a Democrat or Republican?
He was a Democrat.
Democrat, okay.
Democrat. But kind of a Kennedy Democrat. The business people loved him. He got a lot of legislation passed. It was good for business. So it was the November election in 1972 where the laws changed for voting. Then the voting age dropped from 21 to 18.
Wow.
So the first spring election.
Yeah. And that was all tied because of the draft, right?
Right.
Or tied. Okay,
right.
got it.
Yeah, the argument was if you're old enough to go fight and die for your country, you should be able to vote.
Yeah.
All right. So first election after the change of the
Mm-hmm.
voting age was the spring election in 1973. So I was the first 18-year-old ever elected in the state of Wisconsin to an elected office.
So could you run for office before they lowered the?
No.
Okay, got it. So because when they lowered the voting age, they lowered the age in which you were eligible to run for office at the time.
Yep.
Okay, yeah, that would be, if you think about it, that'd be crazy. So you were the first 18-year-old cohort who could actually vote at age 18.
Right.
That's amazing. And what was your sense of, like, college age kids your age? Did they end up registering to vote then, or was it kind of still, or was it?
You go back at it's the early 70s,
Mm-hmm.
right? I'll have people tell you that I probably won because some of my campaign workers handed out joints in the dorm room. I beat an incumbent by 29 votes.
Wow.
So it was pretty close. That was quite an experience for an 18-year-old. I remember the first county board meeting that I went to. I had hair down to my shoulder. The average age, and it was one of the larger county boards in the state of Wisconsin. I think there was 46 members, and the average age was, I think, 70. And they looked at me like, who is this hippie radical? And I introduced a resolution that would require all welfare recipients to work in the parks to get their welfare checks. That's when I understood the power of unions. They came down on me like a ton of bricks. It was great.
How many years did you serve?
I served 2 terms. I only went into my second term halfway through because that was 72. I was reelected in 74.
Oh, you got reelected.
And then in 76, I ran for the state assembly in Oshkosh. I lost in the primary by 129 votes. But because of that experience that I had in Oshkosh and the Winnebago County Board, the then Congressman Bill Steiger recruited me to join his staff in Washington, D.C. Part of the whole discussion is, you asked me earlier about the mentors I've had in my life, and I've really had mentors every decade.
Yeah.
So
was that the first hire where you were first hired in politics?
Right.
For Congress. So this was an official position, right? That you got. Okay.
Yeah. I was Congressman Bill Steiger's legislative assistant for agriculture.
Okay.
Which was a whole nother experience, and ton of stories about Washington, D.C. I know we're bouncing around a bit, but I remember the first staff meeting I went to as a legislative assistant was with 21 other legislative aides for agriculture. And the topic was casein imports. And casein is whey that was coming into the United States. It was really dirty. And about halfway through...
Where was it coming from? That you remember?
The European market.
Okay.
But they didn't have the quality standards we had in the United States. And the congressman wanted to do something about it. The point was, after halfway through the meeting, right? And you got to remember, I'm this poor white boy from White River, Wisconsin. I looked around the room and said, these people are the agriculture assistants. I could have put a picture of a Guernsey cow and a white-tailed deer in front of these people, and they couldn't have told me which one was which.
Yep.
And that kind of was my first experience that what comes out of Washington is not necessarily good.
It's a lot of people who run things that have no direct experience in the industries or the town, really, right? The staff that runs the country really doesn't have any experience with some of the committees or the industries that they have an impact on. I mean, you were probably one of the few staffers who came from the heartland,
rural Wisconsin, which is another reason that the congressman chose me, besides of my political experience and volunteer that work I did on his campaign.
Yeah.
But that was the first paid political job. Up until that point, it was pretty much all volunteer. So in 1976, as an example, after I lost the primary, I became the chairman of Winnebago County for President Ford's reelection campaign. Okay. Which, that's another great story.
Were you still in college during that?
I was still in college. Yeah. Because I was the chairman, and I'm like the youngest chairman of a county in the state of Wisconsin, President Ford came to Oshkosh. And my memory of that is when he was coming off Air Force One, I was at the bottom of the steps. Right? I was so nervous, I couldn't even talk. I'll never forget, he put his hand on my shoulder and said, "Mark, I put my pants on the same way you do. We're all the same." So that's another one that had a really impact. So really, the only person that I've ever been impressed with after that was Pope John Paul. because he didn't wear pants.
What I want to get a sense of, so this is really interesting. So your college experience in politics was bookended by presidential campaigns.
Correct.
Okay, just like mine was George W. Bush in 2004 and then McCain Obama in 2008, which was, I mean, if you think about it completely, so you got a taste of how campaigns were kind of run when you got into college, you got to experience, and then, I mean, sounds like a lot of reform happened where you actually got to vote. How were campaigns kind of run from what you could see in 1972 versus 1976? Was there a big difference?
The whole evolution of campaigns, in my opinion, didn't really start changing from the lawn signs. There was really not even direct mail back then.
Really?
Karl Rove
Okay.
is the one that really came out when he started his company in Texas, and that was more of the 1984, 88 time frame. But it was just your basic, knocking on doors, introducing yourself.
Some yard signs, TV commercials, probably mass media, radio was bigger than TV.
Yeah,
Wow.
they a lot of money on radio because I think more people got their information from radio, quite frankly. Than you go back to that time frame, John. There wasn't cable news 24/7.
3 stations,
ABC, NBC, and CBS.
Unreal.
That was it, right? But radio stations, they
were. That's what people listened to probably in the car. They had them in the cars, right?
Mm-hmm.
Radios in the car. Probably had them at work. Radios were on all day at work, or depending on what the job was. Interesting. But what about earned media?
Letters to the editor. That was your earned media back then.
What about like when so let's jump to when Gerald Ford came into Oshkosh. Like, what was that? Just like a grassroots back then? I mean, there wasn't the live stream of him coming down the steps.
No,
there was probably a newspaper article about it right?
Exactly.
But just a rally, and I mean, so the earned media was print, maybe some radio. They recorded the speech for radio, and maybe. Did it get local? Was there local TV?
No. There was the TV stations were out of Green Bay. But they covered President of the United States. Air Force One.
Yep.
But there wasn't this, other than the print media and the 3 TV stations. That was about it.
That was it.
Which is one of the things I don't think we would see much anymore. Like when Trump had his rally last night in Michigan. Back in those days, you would have had dozens of people putting up posters all over town.
Interesting.
To get the word about the event. You don't see that.
That's crazy. I mean, so when would they start promoting like a presidential visit? I mean, it wasn't. It
wasn't any different then than it is now. You don't get much notice.
Not much notice. So within that week, usually. Okay. Yeah. What about the other thing that I want to just cover of the set? There's 2 things actually, and the first thing on my mind, I guess, is like the power of like the political party. You know what I mean? What was that? Was that basically the infrastructure for a political campaign, for a presidential campaign? And
it was party driven, absolutely, much more than it is today. I don't think that the party itself. Take a look at. Go forward in history, all the way to what we did in Wisconsin in 2010. I don't know if you want to delve into that right now, but what happened in 2010 was outside of the party. So you saw this in the 70s and 80s. It's probably 88 with Bush's first election when you.
This is Bush Senior when
you started seeing the shift away from party to third party or outside groups' influence. And I think the first time that there was a book written about what happened in Colorado, which is what we did. We replicated the Colorado model in Wisconsin in that 2009, 2000 time frame, which that'll take a little bit of discussion when you want to get into that. But go back to, all right, now you're in the 70s, right? I'll use myself as my mentors. Bill Steiger was a mentor of mine in my 20s, right? Mm-hmm. In my 30s, I spent 12 years in the corporate world at NCR Corporation. And my mentor there was Vern Johnson, who was my regional manager. And you get into my 40s, and it was John MacGyver, which we'll spend some time, I'm sure, talking about John MacGyver and his impact on Wisconsin and national politics, and how he mentored me. And then you get into my 50s, right? And it was Herman Cain. And I could spend hours and hours talking about Herman Cain and some of the interesting highlights of not only my experience working with him, for him, along with him, but the whole presidential campaign. And then you hit into my 60s, and now I'm in my 70s, and I think I'm probably being more of a mentor now than needing a mentor.
Well, just to kind of wrap up the 70s, I guess, we got a lot of decades. So when you ran for supervisor, I'm trying to think, are those positions are not partisan?
Correct.
Okay, were they partisan?
No,
No, they never were. But was the Republican Party like a big frame to back you to do that, or was it?
It was the state representative, John at the time, was a Republican. He's the one who recruited me to run for county board. It's quite interesting, and I think you're seeing some of us getting back to that. That in politics, you really got to start at the local level, the school board, city council, county board, state representatives, to build that recruitment base for the future. And you got to remember that time frame. We're coming off now the 74, 76 time frame. Watergate, Nixon resigns. The Republican Party is gone, done, finished, right? So I had to rebuild from literally nothing. And that's what they did. They had people go out and recruit young people to run for local offices. In my case, the county board. But yeah, the parties back then, you needed them, were today, quite frankly, I think they're more of a hindrance than they are.
You just mentioned a couple of things that are really interesting. But tell me about Watergate and what happened to the party.
The whole Watergate thing, and you got to remember that, tore the country apart. And they're diehard, like live and die Republicans that finally realized that Nixon had to go.
Yeah.
It was devastating for the party. What President Ford did by pardoning Nixon was, even though it cost him the presidency, it was probably the only thing that saved the country
to be able to move
bring
forward,
it back together.
Yeah.
And laid the groundwork for Reagan's election in 1980. Yeah. A lot of parallels there, John. 1976, right? Ford loses to Carter.
Yep.
Carter is one of the worst presidents until Biden, right? So now you get 1980, you have this Carter presidency, which was horrible. Gas prices skyrocketing, the Iran hostage situation, and Reagan wins in 1980. And you got Biden, right, winning, and in my opinion, destroys the country, and Trump gets reelected on the second time.
Interesting.
A lot of parallels.
Yeah, a lot
History does repeat itself, John.
Yeah, that's interesting. So then I also just want to capture just the mood of the country, the environment real quickly. So, I mean, because you kind of touched, I didn't live it. You lived it. How are there parallels? I mean, would you say that the mood of the country, the politicization of the electorate was worse in the late 60s and 70s than what it is today? Or do you think today is just...
No, quite frankly, I think they're about the same. Today, I think it's a different
do you think it's amplified more amplified?
It is, because it's more hostile.
Okay.
Right? The country is 50-50. Wisconsin, 50-50, right? But it's hostile, right? Back then, you could have different opinions and still be friends. Well, I don't think today, if you have different opinions, that it's just,
there's all these studies about like just how like older generations don't want their kids to marry into a different political part, right? I mean, so it definitely is definitely more hostile that way.
Back in when I first got involved in politics, I use the example of Bill Steiger. It was a respected profession. To be a congressman was like the epitome of a career, where today people don't respect Congress. They don't respect Washington, D.C., and quite frankly, they shouldn't.
Yeah, they have the lowest approval rating of probably any. I think someone showed that by profession, and they had politicians.
They should, because they're not serving the American people anymore.
Well, why? Where did that go off the rails? Well, while you made that statement, where did you think that really went off the rails?
In the 90s, in the early 90s. I think when it came out of Bush's 4 years and then to the Clinton years, somewhere between the Clinton and then the Bushes and then, the Afghanistan war, I think that's where the mood of the country started splintering, and you get this hostility.
Do you think it was so? I mean, there's a lot of studies that what because I'm trying to understand this, if I'm going to do this for another 10, 20 years, do you think that really changed the...
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. And Roger Ailes deserves a lot of the blame and credit.
I suppose who was the founder of CNN too? Ted Turner, yeah. Yeah, he probably gets some of that. So I was going to ask you one other thing in the 70s, and now I forgot what it was. Something you had mentioned. We talked about the party, the mood of the country. Oh, just Wisconsin, because I also want to try to gauge like how Wisconsin's changed. How has the electorate of Wisconsin kind of changed since the 70s? I mean, has it always been purple? Has it been a swing state?
Pretty much.
Okay.
Wisconsin's a weird state. I mean, if somebody tells you they figured it out, they're lying. Because here you got, go back to Warren Knowles, Republican, quite conservative.
Was he in the 60s or late 60s?
And Pat Lucy, the Democrat, gets elected. And then you roll into the Tommy Thompson years. And, there's some people alive that were born and became voting age, and there was only one governor, Tommy Thompson. Right.
Yep.
So he had a long career in Wisconsin.
What did he do? Did he do 3 terms?
I think it was 4.
4 terms. Wow.
I think it was 4 terms. And then, Tommy Thompson, Scott McCallum, and then you had Jim Doyle, which I don't know if you're going to spend any time on the whole Supreme Court thing and what happened in the 97 race and what came out of that. But then you had Jim Doyle, you had Scott Walker.
Yeah.
And now you got...
What's his name? Why? So just while we're on just touching base, like, why do you think... I mean, what's your hunch about Wisconsin voters? Why are they... I mean, there's some pollsters that are trying to study this. There were some studies that came out a couple years ago where they did these are qualitative. They did a poll, and then they interviewed voters, and they found that Wisconsin voters like divided government. Like, these are what voters admitted because they like the checks and balances between. They don't ever want one party to have too much power. I mean,
John, you're seeing that right now. I mean, Republicans control the Assembly and the Senate, and the Democrats control the governor's office. Yeah, but you're right. Tommy Thompson was governor. He had a Democrat Assembly and a Democrat Senate. So, yeah, I think you're correct. But I haven't quite always figured out Wisconsin voters. Let's talk about the Supreme Court race in 97 and then compare it to the one that we just came through. All right.
So just to set the stage, Wisconsin Supreme Court races, this one was pretty contentious. Like the last 3 or 4 or 5 have been. Is this a theme that's been going on? I mean, you're gonna have these races always been contentious?
No, it hasn't. No? And I think I did 3 statewide Supreme Court races. I did Janine Geske. That was right after I was Tommy Thompson's campaign manager for his reelection.
You were, yep. Okay.
And then where the shift started was the 1997 Supreme Court race. I was the campaign manager for John Wilcox, who was the incumbent Supreme Court. But it was the first time that a Supreme Court race really became national. And what do you mean by that? Well, Justice Wilcox was a swing vote on school choice.
Oh, okay.
All right. So if Wilcox would have lost, you would not have school choice in America today.
That's right, because Wisconsin was the first state to implement school choice or school vouchers. Now we're sitting here, and Saturday my family, we're gonna go hopefully see the governor of Texas sign
That's
the biggest,
awesome. That is
the biggest, choice expansion of the state. It's a shame that Texas is one of the last states, but so that was the biggest. That made it a national race in 1997. Wow.
If Wilcox would have lost, there would not be school choice in America today.
Wow.
And not me saying it. All of the historians say it. I just happened to be Wilcox's campaign manager.
And so was it passed through the Assembly and Senate at the time? And then it was at the Supreme Court? Okay.
Yeah.
So what year did it pass the Wisconsin legislature? Was it a year or 2 before that, you think?
You'd have to go back and look at when Polly Williams, a Democrat who was the author of school choice, Tommy Thompson was governor, signed it into law. If the Supreme Court race was 97, probably in the 92, 94 timeframe.
Wow. So what drove, just while we're...
You go back to the difference in Supreme Court races in Wisconsin up until that point, right? Nobody paid any attention to them, right? Kind of like a circuit court judge. Nobody pays attention because it doesn't affect them personally on a day-to-day basis, right? I ran Supreme Court Justice Janine Geske's campaign. John, It was like running Tommy Thompson's reelection. A monkey could have done it.
Yeah.
Right. And I say
Yeah.
that in all sincerity. I was the campaign manager of Thompson. He won in a landslide, but anybody could have done it. 97, it was like all hell broke loose, right? Because it became a national election. And some very significant things came out of it. I'll never forget. And it goes back to my belief in grassroots. I'll take grassroots people versus a media campaign any day of the week. No offense to what you do for a living, but it's people talking to people, peers talking to peers, that type of thing that I think wins an election. So here we have probably the first major consequential Supreme Court race in Wisconsin's history. John Wilcox, Walt Kelly, extreme liberal lawyer from Wisconsin. And I'll never forget, it was the toughest race I'd ever been involved in. And it's Friday before the election. The radio talk show host most popular at that time was Mark Belling.
He was still, he was on air then.
And he spent most of the first hour bashing Mark Block for running one of the worst campaigns that he's ever seen. Right. That's kind of what I had lived through for the prior 6 months. Yeah. Right. But kind of like the Kane campaign and some of the things I did there, I'm bigger on running stealth campaigns and not really letting people understand what we were doing. So here it is, Friday before the campaign, statewide, Mark Belling saying Mark Block's one of the worst campaigns in history. And 4 days later, the election results come out and we won every single county. We even beat Walt Kelly in his home village, and the rest is history, right? But then what transpired out of that, this is interesting compared to what you saw in the last 6 years, all right? I think historians could look at what was the first lawfare thing that happened against political operatives in the United States. One could argue is what happened to me. You come off of this landslide Supreme Court victory in the state of Wisconsin. School choice is here. Now, Walt Kelly, our opponent, I had dinner with Walt because I knew him a year before the election. And I said, Walt, you don't want to run because I'm going to kick your ass, right? But Walt had won a huge settlement from lawsuit against Milwaukee County. He had the money, but
how much money was spent in Supreme Court races?
It was less than $1 million
for each campaign or total?
No, in each campaign.
Each campaign, okay. Yeah.
But Walt had such an ego that 3 weeks. I'm going to make a 2-year story down here in 2 minutes. Okay. So 3 weeks after the election, Walt Kelly files a complaint with the election board against me for coordination and collusion.
2 weeks before?
After he lost, all right? Now, in my opinion, this is one of the first lawfare type things of taking out your opponents in the United States. I didn't think anything of it because what the whole thing was based upon was a group that had sent postcards out saying, this is John Wilcox, this is Walt Kelly.
A contrast piece, basically.
But it wasn't even a contrast. It was.
Did it say vote for or against or no?
Okay.
This, right? It was basically it was an issue piece.
It was John Wilcox, Supreme Court Justice, Walt Kelly, ACLU lawyer.
Yep.
That was pretty much the message. I didn't think anything of it because the group that did it had approached me in January. The election's in April. They approached me in January, said that we're thinking about doing this. And I'm going like, hey, you can't talk to me about that, right? That's called coordination and collusion. I said, get yourself a lawyer. They got the best, Michael Best and Friedrich at the time. And Michael Best got an opinion from the legal counsel from the state election board that what they were going to do was legal. I had a copy of the opinion that said it was legal, so I didn't think anything of it, right? All right, so 3 weeks later, Walt Kelly files this complaint with the election board. The same time this is happening, I've heard this from 3 other people. Jim Doyle's the governor, the attorney general, and he's planning on running for governor. And he told people, I need Block taken out. Block can't be involved in this. So for 2 years, I fought that I didn't do anything wrong. I eventually settled after being destitute, house foreclosed on, and I knew I was toast when Tommy Thompson gave the State of the Union address, which is big news, but it was the second on the newspaper The first one was Block Supreme Court justices recused themselves from hearing my case. The majority of the Supreme Court justices recused themselves.
Well, they were clients probably.
Because they were clients, and it got knocked down to the lower court that had ruled against me. And that's when the lawyer is going, we got to bring in criminal lawyers now. I didn't do anything.
Yeah.
Right. So I settled with the elections board, huge fine. They barred me from politics for 3 years, but I admitted no wrongdoing.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Now,
was the whole investigation driven by the elections board, or was
It's all
was Doyle? Was the Attorney General's office behind it too?
They were, because at one point they had 52 investigators talking to my high school friends.
Wow.
Did everything to destroy me. Now, I'm going to fast forward and come back for a second.
Okay.
Right?
Yeah.
During the Kane campaign, Time Magazine did a deep dive on me. All right. And they finally got George Dunst, the lawyer from the election board, to admit that Block got railroaded.
You have the piece that I can, we'll add this to the quote right to the video. Block got. So he admitted that they really did a number on him, is what he said.
Yep.
Recall, let me just read this. But George Dunst, the board's former general counsel, recalls that the evidence was shaky. Quote, Block got screwed, he says, and then, quote, they really did a number on him, end quote. That was from the lawyer who pursued it was the lawyer that initially gave the legal advice from the election board that what this group was doing was legal. Okay. Right? When all of the lawsuits then, and it ended up going to the state Supreme Court. In fact, the case Block, or the state of Wisconsin versus Block, is used in law classes. Yeah. And I guess because campaign finance has changed, even in Wisconsin and then federally too, a third party group sent out postcards, didn't even have electioneering communication on it by today's standards. But then, were they saying that was electioneering communication by having
back then it was called coordination and collusion. Okay. Right.
What were they saying was actually
that we were coordinating our messaging. Okay. Therefore, we were colluding. Got it. Right. And they used outside funds for that postcard mailing. So basically, they were saying if the same things were put in place today, you'd all be in jail. Yeah. I mean, today they skirt around it by leaking on YouTube what they're going to be doing in a TV ad. They put it in an obscure YouTube channel that then the third-party groups can find. And I mean, even today with some of the FEC rules, you can do data sharing. I tell you, I can literally share a campaign, and a third party can share data with each other as long as the value is the same or watching equivalent. This last election cycle would blew my mind when I started seeing turning point folks meeting with the Trump people, sitting down and coordinating. That's what I was accused of, and almost destroyed me. But it fought back. So you took a 3-year hiatus from politics? When the ruling was announced that I had agreed to a plea deal, I had offices in Elm Grove, Madison, and Washington, D.C. This was your consulting firm at the time. Within 24 hours, I lost every client I had. I ended up stocking shelves at night in order to pay the bills and send my kids to school. But I came back. Poetic justice. Fast forward to I'm at the Harvard Kennedy School of Politics annual event after a presidential election, where they bring in all of the campaign managers. My turn to speak, and I'm standing in front of room full of political powerhouses from the last election, media people. This would have been, what year would this have been? It would have been 2013. Okay, got it. So after the primary and Obama's reelection. Exactly. And who's sitting in front of me but Jim Doyle? And it was poetic justice, because I got up and said, before I begin my remarks, I need to thank former Governor Jim Doyle sitting in front of me, because if it wasn't for his policies, the Tea Party movement would have never happened. Did he smile? No. Looks could have been killed, or looks could have killed, I'd be dead.
Thanks for listening to Campaign Now, a conversation with Mark Block. See you next time.